Now let's have some fun with the law of supply and demand. Okay, remember that gas prices jumped after Hurricane Katrina. They usually jump after a hurricane. All right? So why do prices jump like that? Is it because firms are evil and they're gouging consumers? Well, no, it has nothing to do with that. What happens after an event like Katrina, a huge hurricane? Well, the supply of gasoline is going to fall. Why does the supply of gasoline fall? Well, you got all these oil refineries, or not oil refineries, we have all these oil rigs in the Gulf in the path of a hurricane. Now, if you're a roughneck, a worker on one of these platforms, like in the movie Armageddon, you want to get off that platform because a hurricane is barreling down, right? Now, all the workers are going to leave. They're not going to leave the equipment running. So they're going to shut down the oil rig, and they're going to evacuate the oil rig. And there's a lot of these oil rigs in the Gulf that were in the path of Katrina. So all these oil rigs were shut down. All the workers were evacuated, right? So crude oil prices are rising. The marginal cost of gasoline production is going to rise too, which is a decrease in supply. Okay. Now, on the other hand, when people are faced with a hurricane barreling down on them, what do? Well, they get 8 or 9 of those red plastic gasoline jugs they use to put gasoline in their lawnmowers. They put them in their pickup trucks. They put their family in the pickup truck. They put a bunch of supplies in the pickup truck. They go to the gas station. They fill the pickup truck or the cars up with gasoline, and then they fill those gas jugs, those 8, 9, 5-gallon jugs that are red with gasoline. So consumers are trying to get out of harm's way, and they're afraid there's not going to be any gas after the hurricane wipes out entire town. So the demand spikes. And because of that, you have a higher price in gasoline. Okay, so the price goes from $2.50 to $3.92. Okay, now let me ask you a question. Suppose a well-meaning, well-intentioned politician says that, or claims that because it looks like firms are gouging the public during a crisis, right? They're going to force or enact a law that says the maximum price firms can charge is the before hurricane price. Okay? Now that sounds great, but what are the consequences of such a policy? Okay? So the government sets the before hurricane price. Okay? So what does that create? Well, it creates a shortage. Now, if it did not set this price ceiling, people could buy as much gasoline as they wanted at the market price. In this diagram, it's $3.92. But because government sets a maximum price firms can buy or sell the gasoline at, it creates a shortage. Consumers will want to consume this much gasoline. Meanwhile, firms will only supply this much gasoline. Okay, so it creates a huge shortage, which is evident if you go onto YouTube and you Google 1970s, or you go on YouTube and you search for 1970s gas lines, you're going to see people lined up at gas pumps because the Nixon administration put in price ceilings on gasoline. It created lines, shortages. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is, if government doesn't impose a price ceiling on gasoline, the free market, which gets a lot of unnecessary criticism, the free market, not the crony capitalist markets, but the free market makes all Americans help out to bear the burden of a hurricane destroying a major U.S. city. And how is that? Well, imagine you are a New Yorker who sells refined gasoline to New York area gas stations. And in New York, you're selling the gasoline at $2.50. You notice that down in, like, say, Charlotte, North Carolina, the gasoline price is $4 a gallon. What are you going to do as a self-interested profit maximizer going to do? What are you going to do? You can sell your gasoline for the low price of $2.50 in New York, or you can sell it in Charlotte or Atlanta for $4 a gallon. Well, you'll do what? You'll try to sell your gasoline down in Atlanta. Okay? That raises supply in Atlanta, in Charlotte, right? And when supply goes up and demand's constant in Atlanta and Charlotte, the price in Atlanta and in Charlotte, North Carolina, the price will come down. Meanwhile, less is being supplied in New York City, right? So supplies fall in New York City, which drives up the price in the New York City area. So those prices will continue to rise in New York and fall in Charlotte until they're equal. Therefore, the free market has New Yorkers, people living in Chicago and out west, bearing some of the cost that the people in the South are bearing. When government steps in and says to gasoline companies the highest price you can pay or charge is $2.50, it creates shortages. The free market makes all Americans help bear this burden. Their prices go up, which pulls down the prices in the South. So the government's good intentions result in long lines at the gas pump, which is what we call a shortage. Okay. Now this is kind of funny. Only government would do this. Back in, I think 2006, President Bush gave, in his State of the Union address, he announced he was going to double the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which are just underground salt caverns in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. Now he announced this when crude oil prices were already at all-time highs. Okay, crude oil prices were like $140, $150 per barrel. Okay, so he makes this announcement that he's going to double the size of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Okay, and since the government is a big buyer of crude oil, demand for crude oil rises. So this would do what? It would raise an already historically high crude oil price even higher. Now, a profit-maximizing, self-interested firm or individuals or firms are going to do what? Well, they're going to buy when the price is low. They're not going to buy when the price is at an all-time high. But that's what government does, because the money they're using to make these purchases is somebody else's money. And people aren't very good stewards of other people's money. For example, if your mom gives you a cell phone and puts no stipulations on your use of that phone, and you have a friend in Europe going to school for a semester, what are you going to do? You'll call Europe, and your mom will say, hey, you got to stop calling Europe because my phone bill was $800. Don't do it again. What are you going to do? The next month you'll do the same thing because it's somebody else's money. Now, if your mom says all of a sudden you can't use the cell phone anymore, and she throws it in the garbage, and if you want a cell phone, what are you going to do? You're going to go out and sign a 2-year contract, and if you run up a phone bill calling Europe with your cell phone, you're going to go, dang, I'm not doing that ever again, because now you're using your own money to pay the bill. And that's why government does things like this, buying crude oil at historically high prices when they shouldn't. Now the question is, are they ignorant? Or was it intentional? Was this policy intentionally or intended to intentionally drive up the crude oil prices even higher? I'll leave that for you to think about or to answer. Okay, so how does a higher crude oil price affect gasoline prices? Well, like I mentioned earlier, crude oil is an input to the production of gasoline, and if crude oil prices go up, then the marginal cost goes from here up to here. Okay, so holding price constant, we have a decrease in supply. Now, because there's a demand curve here, the price of gasoline rises as the crude oil price rises from government buying more. So this policy has an effect of not only raising the crude oil price, but also has the effect of raising the price of gasoline that you pay at the pump. It also has the effect of raising the price of coffee or raising the price of fruit. Why do I say that? Because if gasoline prices are higher, then semi-trucks that are being used to transport goods from distribution centers to grocery stores, well, their costs go up. And so that gets passed off in the form of higher prices that you pay at the grocery store. Because those things that you buy at the grocery stores are being transported mostly by semi-trucks. Here's some gasoline facts. In 2005, the U.S. imported about 4 billion barrels of crude oil. Refineries convert crude oil into gasoline, diesel fuel, asphalt, heating oil, kerosene, amongst other things. And the U.S. has not built a new refinery since 1976, even though those refineries that are out there have expanded. Gasoline tax in North Carolina amounts to about 40 to 50 cents per gallon, while in New York it's about 60 cents. Okay, so if your driving consumes 20 gallons of gas per week, over 52 weeks, you pay $500 in gasoline tax in North Carolina versus over $600 in New York City. The U.S. economy consumes about 388 million gallons of gasoline per day, or 150 trillion gallons per year. U.S. consumers, because federal tax is 18 cents a gallon, U.S. consumers pay about $27.1 billion in federal gas taxes back in the year 2005. Now, remember when ExxonMobil had a 2007 pre-tax profit of about $70 billion and there was all that hubbub? Well, with a 35% tax rate, ExxonMobil's estimated tax bill, would be about $30 billion. I think they paid closer to $20 billion, somewhere between 20 and 30. But and you can look that up online. You can go to Yahoo Finance and download their balance sheet. So they paid about $20 to $30 billion in taxes. Okay, that's about 10% of all corporate income taxes. Now, there was a big hubbub about this, right? That ExxonMobil's profiting and punishing consumers. I don't see it that way at all. What does ExxonMobil do? What is ExxonMobil? Well, ExxonMobil is about 80,000 employees. And that's about a $9 billion payroll. Or, well, it's, if you multiply maybe 45 to 50,000 times 80,000 employees, it's a huge payroll. Okay. Plus, they got thousands, maybe millions of investors that own ExxonMobil stock, right? And in the year that they made this kind of profit, about $40 billion after tax, they paid out a $9 billion dividend to the shareholders, which includes people like me, because I have an energy mutual fund. And so when ExxonMobil pays dividends, they make their way down to me. And when they're paying a dividend, well, that might drive up the stock price, holding everything else constant, which means investors might be able to retire earlier. So I think it's great that ExxonMobil paid roughly $30 billion in taxes and gave investors a $9 billion dividend. In addition to that, gasoline prices, despite all the interventions in the marketplace, the gasoline taxes, the fact that they got to, come up with like 18 to 20 different kinds of gasoline for different parts of the country. Frankly, I'm surprised that gasoline prices aren't higher, say $5 or $6 a gallon. Now, if you don't like the fact that they had a $40 billion after-tax profit, this is America. You are free, if you want, to buy their stock and share in that dividend. Interestingly enough, General Electric in the year 2010, I believe, made $5 billion on American sales. They paid reportedly zero income tax. No outrage over that. Microsoft did the same thing. Paid very little income tax. No criticism whatsoever of those two companies. But a company that's paying 10% of the corporate tax bill in 2007 is somehow doing something wrong. I don't know. I don't see it. Okay, let's have a little more fun with supply and demand. Okay. Now this model was, I came up with this on a napkin when I went to a meeting at the School of Education a few years ago. And according to this meeting, every middle school math class was being taught by history teachers. And the School of Education was trying to get a $3 million grant to mentor middle school math teachers into being better math teachers. Now, the typical history major chooses history because they're not good in math or they don't like math. Okay, so first and foremost, trying to help a history teacher become a better math teacher, in my opinion, seems like not the smartest thing to do with $3 million. Okay, so during this meeting, I sat there and I drew these two diagrams. So let's ask the questions. What do people with math skills, what can they make in the private sector if they don't work for a public school? Well, if they don't work for a public school, they can be an economist. And the average offer to an economics major upon graduation is about $50,000 to $60,000. Engineers, about the same amount of money. Both professions require people that have math skills, quantitative skills. This right here is about $50,000 to $60,000 a year on average right out of college. Now, what about a history major who chooses not to work for a public school system? Well, there's just not a lot of jobs in the private sector. Unfortunately, for people that don't want to work for a public school system, they're probably going to make $20,000 to $25,000 a year at a museum or maybe even making coffee at a Starbucks. So there's a big difference in the wages that these two groups of people are going to be paid. Big difference, right? The math, quantitative skills are highly valued by the private sector, right? Whereas the skills that a typical history major accumulates aren't quite as highly valued. Now, this is what the free market would say, that you have to pay math teachers and history teachers. Unfortunately, that's what the free market says. Now, because paying teachers different salaries seems unfair, central planning school districts will pay all first-year teachers the same wage, say $30,000, which seems fair and seems like a good idea. But are there any unintended consequences of doing such? So paying all first-year teachers the same wage does create some problems. In the private sector, a person with math skills can make $50,000 or $60,000 working in the fields of economics, finance, statistics, engineering. But the school district is only paying $30,000. Therefore, only this many math teachers or people with math skills become math teachers. Meanwhile, the school district needs this many math teachers. Okay. Now, over in the history market, because people with history skills can make a lot more in the school district, this many people will get a history degree and look for work as a history teacher. Meanwhile, the schools only need this many history teachers. So this policy of paying every teacher the same wage creates a surplus of history teachers and a shortage of math teachers, which is exactly what I found out attending that meeting at the School of Education back in 2006. Guilford County schools were using history teachers to teach all math classes at the middle school level. That rather than using the $3 million to mentor history teachers into being better math teachers, the $3 million would be better used to offer a wage differential. Maybe not, if this is 50 and this is 30, you maybe won't need a $20,000 per year wage differential, right? You may only need a $10,000 wage differential because, the world of finance, private sector work, 12 months a year, 50, 60 hours a week, as opposed to, 9 months out of the year with many 3-day weekends, Thanksgiving break off, Christmas break off, summers off. The school district may only need to pay a $10,000 wage differential. So instead of paying math teachers the $30,000 that all teachers get, you could pay them, say, $40,000, and that would probably help close this shortage. Now, the interesting thing is, about a year later, the school district over in Winston-Salem announced they were going to do just that. Now, it may sound odd that a school system would want to pay teachers this different wages because they're, after all, teaching, right? They're all teachers. But this is common at most universities. At most universities, finance, accounting, and marketing professors are really, really highly compensated. Engineering professors are highly compensated. Professors that teach in the humanities usually make quite a bit less. So, although it seems unfair, it is common at the university level, so why not apply it at the public school system level? Now, it may sound odd that a school system would want to pay teachers this different wages because they're, after all, teaching, right? They're all teachers. But this is common at most universities. At most universities, finance, accounting, and marketing professors are really, really highly compensated. Engineering professors are highly compensated. Professors that teach in the humanities usually make quite a bit less. So, although it seems unfair, it is common at the university level, so why not apply it at the public school system level? In a low-skilled labor market, people, either high school dropouts or barely high school dropout, their skill sets aren't worth very much on average. Okay, we're not talking about Lebron James. We're not talking about college dropouts like Bill Gates. We're talking about the typical average high school graduate or high school dropout. Okay, now their skill sets aren't very highly valued. They have very little education. As such, the free market says pay them $5 an hour. Now, a politician might say, well, that's too low. Let's give them, instead of paying them $5 an hour where the market clears, at this wage of $5 an hour, people that want a job have a job, right? But a politician says $5 an hour is too low. We want to alleviate poverty by imposing a minimum wage. So what does imposing a minimum wage, say at $8 an hour, do in this low-skilled labor market? Well, it means that, say, a firm like Walmart will maybe, instead of having 500 employees at a store, after this minimum wage is imposed, maybe Walmart does what? Allows, through the natural process of turnover, it'll reduce its staffing at its stores from, say, 500 to 300. And the way it does this, it adopts technology, like, for example, the self-checkout lanes, where you have one person running 3 or 4 checkouts, right? Instead of one person, one register, now you have one person running maybe 6 of them. Okay, so firms do this all the time. McDonald's is always looking for ways to reduce its staffing at its restaurants. Okay, now at the same time, people that would not want to make $5 an hour are now interested in working for $8 an hour, but they can't find work, right? So the losers here are the people that were making $5 an hour, right, that lost their job. So this difference between E star and E are the number of people that were happy making 5, well, maybe not happy, but willing to make $5 an hour rather than not work at all. This difference represents the number of people that lose their job as a result of the minimum wage hike. This difference represents the number of people that would like to work for $8 an hour but can't find work. So the difference between E and LF, that's the number of losers that this policy creates. The winners are the people that keep their job and are now making $8 an hour. And the difference between the labor force size and E is unemployment. So this policy creates unemployment. Now, this policy is not going to create unemployment in higher skill or medium skill labor markets. It's going to generally create the unemployment in low skilled labor markets. Now, suppose politicians say, well, $8 an hour is just not enough. Firms are going to continue to shed workers and replace them with technology. Okay? So maybe instead of having self-checkout lanes being run by 6 people, grocery stores, supermarkets get rid of tellers altogether, and they install a bank of lasers that scan all the UPC codes on the groceries in your grocery cart as you walk out the door. But the only way the door will open is if you swipe a debit card or a credit card. So all the groceries that are in the cart get scanned by these banks of lasers, and the only way you can get out of the store is by swiping a credit card or a debit card or maybe an EBT card, and then the door is open, you go to your car. So that might be a result of even higher minimum wages. Okay, so and even more people want to work at the now higher wage. So unemployment rises even more in these low skilled labor markets. Every election year, it seems like immigration is one of the biggest topics that is being debated amongst the politicians. And the sad story is you're only getting part of the story. The story that you hear is that immigration, a flood of low-skilled workers into an economy, will increase the supply curve, right? So we go from this supply curve, if we hold the wages constant, out to this supply curve because there's just more low-skilled workers in this economy. And you hear that, well, this drives down wages. Conservative politicians are accused of liking this kind of policy because firms' marginal cost fall and their unit profits rise. But that's only part of the story. When wages fall like it does here for native workers, what happens to all the supply curves of every firm that sells products in the United States? What happens to their supply curves? And when wages fall, marginal cost falls, which increases supply. So if we hold all of the factors constant, when supply is increasing, output's going up, and prices are coming down. Well, that's good for the poor. Prices are coming down, right? Prices of food, prices of energy are coming down because supply curves increase as a result of the fall in marginal cost. So that benefits the poor, right? Now, if output is rising, which when supply curves predict, if output's rising, then firms will need even more employees. And firms that are needing more employees aren't just going to hire more low-skilled laborers. They're going to hire more middle-skilled laborers and more high-skilled laborers. Okay, so they're going to demand more laborers. So if we go back and I erase low skill here and I write high skill, then firms that want to produce more are going to demand more high-skilled labor. So imagine there's a red labor demand curve out here as a result of immigration. So the high-skilled workers' wages are going to go from W star up to a new equilibrium level, which is great for high-skilled workers, namely people like myself with a PhD, right? And the same thing is going to happen to middle-skilled workers, okay? So now going back to the low-skilled labor market, right? This lowers the marginal cost of production, which increases supply, right? Firms produce more. If firms are producing more, they need more low-skilled laborers. So the labor demand curve will do what in the low skilled labor market? It too will increase. Now, the longer the horizon, the more this labor demand curve will shift to the right. Right? So in the short run, which politicians generally are short run focused, in the short run, the shift in the labor demand curve is very small. But over the longer term, the shift in the labor demand curve will be much larger, holding everything else constant. So the longer our time horizon, the more the labor demand curve shifts to the right, right? So the real effect on low skilled wages isn't going to be this amount down here. It'll be somewhere out here because labor demand for low skilled workers is rising. So, but that's very hard to explain all that in a 15-second soundbite. So all you hear on the news is that effect. Now this is a really fun, interesting application of law of supply and demand. Let's ask the question, is LeBron James overpaid? Remember, when he graduated from high school, or was getting ready to graduate from high school, he couldn't go to college because he bought a Hummer. He was able to get a loan to buy a Hummer. His mom bought a brand new house, you know, $1 million, I don't know, it was like $1 million house, I guess. And she was able to get a loan for that. And why was a bank willing to give LeBron James and LeBron James's mom loans for a new home and a Hummer? Well, it's because his future expected income was going to rise substantially over the course of the year. Okay. Now, when LeBron was in high school, there was so much demand for his high school basketball games that they had to move his games from the high school gym to the big Columbus arena. And then they couldn't satisfy the demand, so they broadcast his high school basketball games on pay-per-view. So, before LeBron, Cleveland averaged about 12,000 fans per game, with an average ticket price of about $40 per ticket. Now, after LeBron was hired and began playing basketball for Cleveland, the average ticket price went up to $41, and they started to sell out every home game on average. Now, is there anybody out there that thinks that this increase in average ticket price and this increase in ticket sales has anything to do with anybody other than LeBron? No. Nearly all of that is attributable to adding LeBron James to the team's roster. Okay, so we're gonna label the demand for Cavalier home basketball games before LeBron James, BL, DBL, and after LeBron James, DAL, after LeBron. Okay, so the supply curve is vertical because the stadium the Cleveland Cavaliers play in, the arena they play in, is 20,000 seats. Now, according to numbers that a former student of mine gave me in a project that he turned in for my sports econ class that I taught during the summer, according to his data, the average ticket price was $40 per ticket, and they were only selling about 12,000 seats, roughly, before LeBron James. So the question is, was Cleveland listening to the free market? The free market says, with the kind of interest there was in watching home games, Cleveland Cavalier home games, the ticket price should have probably been more like maybe, say, $30, not $40. Because the ticket price being $40 created an excess supply or empty seats in the amount of 8,000 seats. Okay, so when you watched a Cleveland Cavalier game on TV and the camera kind of showed the arena, you would see a lot of empty seats. Why? Because Cleveland wasn't listening to the free market. Now, after LeBron is drafted, the demand for home game tickets, soared, right? The demand curve shifted to the right. And because the home games were typically sold out, there were no empty seats, the average ticket price rose to $41. So after LeBron James, Cleveland was, in a sense, listening to the free market. Now, let's calculate the revenue per home game before LeBron. Okay, The gray box represents the revenue per home game before LeBron James. Now, why do I say the box represents revenue? Well, the height of the gray box from 0 to 40 is the height of the gray box, right? 0 to 40, it has a height of 40. The width of this box is 12,000 seats. And remember, revenue is price, height, times quantity, width. Height times width, or price times quantity, is the formula for area. So, before LeBron James, home game ticket revenue was $48,000 per home game. Okay? Now, after LeBron James, the height of this revenue box jumps to 41, the width jumps out to 20,000, so therefore, revenue increased as a result of adding one LeBron James to the roster. It jumped by almost doubled, right? It nearly doubled. Okay, so total revenue for 41 home games is just under $20 million before LeBron James. It's almost $34 million after LeBron James. So, in economics, we call this change in revenue when one unit of labor, a certain type of labor, is increased by 1 unit. We call that the marginal revenue product of adding employees. Okay, so the change in the number of LeBrons on the roster went from 0 to 1. So the change in LeBrons is 1. The change in total revenue is $13.9 million. Okay? That's a lot of revenue. Now, we're not even talking about parking. We're not even talking about the increase in parking fees that the team is collecting. We're not talking about the increase in ticket revenues that other teams are benefiting from when Cleveland goes on the road. We're not talking about increased concession sales. We're not talking about increased jersey sales at the arena. We're just talking about home ticket sales. So this is dramatic, isn't it? Now, adding one LeBron increases total revenue by $13.94 million, while the marginal cost of hiring one LeBron, I think his original rookie salary, base salary, was like $6 million. So the marginal cost or the marginal expense of adding one LeBron is much lower than the marginal revenue of doing so. And in economics, you want to continue, in labor economics, you want to continue adding a certain type of labor until its marginal expense equals its marginal revenue product. Okay? So Cleveland would love to continue hiring more LeBrons until marginal revenue equals marginal cost in the labor market. However, that's not possible because there's only one LeBron. Now, this explains why the Miami Heat added 3 LeBron James, right? Or 3 superstars. They had Wade, right? But Wade's marginal revenue product was much higher than his marginal cost, so they added LeBron James. Adding the second superstar must have meant, and when they went from 2 to 3 superstars, must have meant when they added LeBron, the marginal revenue product of adding a superstar was still higher than the marginal cost of adding the second superstar. So they added a third LeBron, a third superstar. And if you look at most decisions of teams today, the good teams are doing what? They're adding 2 or 3 superstars. The New York Knicks, the Miami Heat, etc. Now, let me ask you this question. How many additional fans would come to a Cleveland home game to watch me, a 6'1" white guy, sit at the end of the bench? Well, maybe my mom, my wife, my grandmother, right? This increase in quantity demanded is so small that it would have no effect on the ticket price, right? On the average ticket price. So the total revenue before Hal is, again, just like it was for LeBron James, this is before the add LeBron, or before the add me instead of LeBron, is about $19 to $20 million. Now, adding me to the roster means that the team is now selling 3 additional seats. One for my mom, my grandmother, and my wife. There are still 41 home games. And the ticket price didn't change because, frankly, I'm not going to generate enough interest, additional interest in the team to drive up the average ticket price of Cleveland Cavalier home games. So the total revenue after I'm added to the end of the bench is about the same as it was before I was added. So the marginal revenue product of adding one HAL, right? We went from 0 HALs to 1 additional HAL. The marginal revenue product of adding 1 HAL is about $4,920. Adding 1 HAL increases total home game revenue by only $4,900, while the marginal cost of hiring 1 HAL is league minimum. Now, years ago, the league minimum was $10,000 or $50,000 a year. Now it's probably more like $500,000 a year. So what does this mean? Since the marginal revenue is less than the marginal cost of adding a HAL to the roster, Cleveland would not want to hire additional HALs. In fact, the team would prefer cutting him from the squad altogether.